In the name of the one, holy, undivided Trinity.
Amen.
I wonder if your imagination soars as mine does. I'd be curious if anybody's like me. When the celebrant at the Eucharist come up for the table says those majestic words, "Therefore we praise you," joining our voices with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven. There are times that my imagination soars and I start picturing, visualizing the saints. And so for me, there's a continual celebration of All Saints Day. The company of heaven, after all, are the saints. Saints, faithful, questioning, willing-hearted people from the past, with us today, young and old, rich, poor, week by week, gathering around the holy table. Heaven and earth join for a moment. Together, we are together with the living God. I'd like you to think of that this morning, of All Saints. So to get your imagination going, mine goes all the time, but you might need a warm-up. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I would like you to visualize, to think of the saints. Who are the saints to you? What do they look like? What is their facial expression? Would they be holding anything in their hands? Here's an example. Think of the Last Supper. Who is there? Maybe the woman cooks in the back who are serving this motley crew. Simon Peter, the bumbling fisherman who struggles to have faith, patience, and always wants to understand more. Maybe the Zebedee boys, the sons of thunder. They're a handful, James and John. John right next to Jesus, the beloved disciple. Mary, the mother of Jesus, adoring, ensuring that Jesus eats enough. One of my favorites, Mary Magdalene, faithful, the one who Jesus appeared to, empty tomb on Easter morning, looking beautiful. Who else is part of the communion of saints? Priscilla, one of our earliest apostles, John the Baptist, the persistent baptizer, patron saint of this community. Maybe you're visualizing martyrs, people who spread good news in the midst of threats. Traditional ones like old Bishop Polycarp, who said, "For 86 years I have served God, and God never did me any wrong. How can I blaspheme my King who saved me?" Maybe more contemporary saints. Martin Luther, Nelson Mandela, maybe Daniel Pearl, or even Robin Williams. Our students of school shootings. Who is with you? Who's with us this morning? Saints. They share a common trait. And I would argue to say that saints embody the great reversal. And what I mean by that is that they are ordinary people who tap into the extraordinary thing. And that extraordinary thing is an acceptance of grace that they've been given, an acceptance of love. And so saints say, and they live, the reverse of the world's message of separateness, isolation, competition, the lie that we are not enough. Having received accepted grace, saints are people who live differently. what the world teaches. And they're not just people of the past. Saints are with us today. A saint sits next to you in the pew. They strive to love their enemy. They strive to do good to those who hate them and to bless those who curse them, to pray for those who abuse them. They might not always get there, but the desire is within them. So All Saints' Day, today, it is your day. It is their day. You are a saint too. Not because you successfully love, or that you always do good, or you pray without ceasing, but you strive to love, and you strive to do good and to pray because you've accepted that you are filled with grace and you are loved. Baptism. It's what makes us saints. That is the great reversal. Baptism isn't a symbolic gesture only, and it is not a reenactment or a play that honors a vague value. We were guided to the springs of water, the springs of the water of life, and something happened. Baptism, it affects, and it opens up something inside us. So I'd like to tell you a story of how baptism opened up something inside an ordinary girl who later did an extraordinary thing. Back in 2009, I was a student chaplain at Emmanuel Hospital in northeast Portland, and I was paged by the head nurse to one of the trauma units. She told me that a young woman named Crystal wanted to see a chaplain. When I got into Crystal's room, I said, "What can I do for you?" And she said, "I think it's time I get my life together." Crystal was 26, and she was from Detroit. She came from a devout Baptist family, and at age 9, she was baptized. She described her family as loving and close. When Crystal was 18, she told her parents that she was moving out to live with her boyfriend. And her parents told her that they loved her, but this was completely against their values. And they asked her to go talk to the pastor. She complied, but it didn't have the desired effect, and Crystal moved out. Never having been out of Michigan, she moved to California and eventually made her way to Portland, Oregon. And it was a rough life that she made for herself. She found a job as a prostitute, but she did secure an apartment, and she found friends, and then she got sick. She was weak for a long time before she went to see a doctor. She waited so long that she had to go directly to the emergency room at Emmanuel, and they admitted her immediately. She was to live for 6 weeks only. Crystal's main concern was that she had not talked to God in 8 years since she left Detroit. And so she felt separate and isolated and not in relationship with God. As a chaplain, it was an honor to hear of her longing for God. Realistic about her illness and meeting with me every single day with a lot of humor, it didn't take long for Crystal to get back on firm footing with God. The grace that she received from her baptism was not far off. But Crystal's health went in the opposite direction. One of the mornings that was supposed to be her last day, breathing with the assistance of oxygen, she said, "It's time for me to see my family." So she called them, and they said that they would get there as soon as they possibly could. Crystal's dad had a phobia of flying, so they did load him up on Valium, and he got on that plane, and he arrived at 8 p.m. that night. Crystal's mom, dad, 3 sisters, and a brother. They entered the room silently, because remember that the family hadn't seen each other for 8 years. They were afraid, and they stood lining the perimeter of that hospital room. And Crystal did an awesome thing. She took my hand and she held it toward her father's. Chaplain, I would like you to meet my dad. He has been such a great dad. Her dad moved closer and said, I love you, Crystal. And that allowed the whole family to draw closer together. And they hugged and they kissed. And Crystal said, I love you all. I've always loved you. I just haven't been able to say it in a long time. Minutes later, Crystal said, I would like to talk to each of you alone. Heather, would you stay with me? So when we were alone, Crystal asked, are you sure God is with me? I replied, I'm sure. Crystal's brother, Howard, came in. They talked about their favorite foods as kids, and Howard held Crystal and told her that he would keep a photograph of her on his desk for the rest of his life. Crystal spoke with her family members one by one. It took 2 hours. And then Crystal asked for everybody to come back in. When we were all in the room, she said, I would like to say the Lord's Prayer together. We did. And a few minutes later, Crystal died. But see what Crystal did. She stood in the midst of estrangement, of emotional guilt that we all feel as humans. And she brought grace right into that room. She was like Jesus for her family. And in a sense, it almost didn't matter that she died because the room was exploding with life. And so it is with baptism. A space is carved out for each of us for that kind of life to take root. A flood of life that affects us. And it can sweep us off our feet if we let it. It's an extraordinary thing about your life, about you. The grace-filled life. It's what makes us saints. And I would argue it's us, being saints, that makes the difference in the world. It's the only thing that really saves the world. This morning, a new saint is going to come among us, Adeline. She will become part of the communion of saints. And as she strives in her sainthood, it is our job to help her remember and to recall the grace, what has been opened up inside of her as she grows up. Actually, it's not just her. It's the person sitting next to you who's a saint. Remind them of the grace, the extraordinary thing about their life. Remind yourself, you are a saint. The extraordinary thing about your life. Let's discover together the inexpressible joy that we are living together in the communion of saints.